Maya, the show's yours.
Thank you. So take a breath with me, everyone. Inhale. And then exhale the breath. Let's do that again. Inhale. Exhale the breath. So I want to welcome you to the International Gathering Sangha. And this Sangha is a part of the Yoga Alliance Building International Relationships Program. My name is Maya Breuer, and I'm Vice President of Cross-Cultural Advancement. I'd like to begin by sharing a reading from, I think it's In the Spirit, Pathways to the Spirit by Susan Santucci. Our reading today is Use Affirmations. I am is the strongest creative statement in the universe. I am sets into motion those experiences, calls them forth, brings them to you. Neil Donald Walsh. Change your affirmation with power. See yourself living your goal in the present. Trust that the universe is bringing your most cherished desire to you, and that when the timing is right, your dream will manifest. Affirmation and unswerving belief are two of the most powerful creative forces in the universe. Our thoughts form a powerful blueprint in our subconscious minds. Change your thoughts, and you too can change your whole life. Let's just close our eyes and take that in. Change your thoughts, and you too can change your life, your whole life. Allow your eyes to open. I'd like to begin by welcoming our guest from Yoga Alliance, and she is Josie Prudencio. She's the Vice President of Finance at Yoga Alliance and for the Yoga Alliance Foundation. And I am just very pleased to have her with us today. And so I welcome you, Josie, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. I'm really interested in, I've always had an international calling since very young. When I was in high school, I was part of a magnet program to welcome all international students to our school. And we had a very large school down in Central Florida. And it was such a passion of mine. I was named Ambassador of the Year for my senior year. And it was like the biggest accomplishment that I could have achieved my senior year. So I am thrilled to be here with people from all around the world to hear about yoga and how it's impacting your lives in all areas of the world. And just so that you know a little bit about what I do for Yoga Alliance, I am the safekeeper of our assets. And I just make sure that we're being prudent and following all the rules and regulations that we need to, and taking care of our financials so that we continue to be able to serve. I am passionately connected to the mission for both entities. I have seen the impacts of yoga and what it can do. And so I truly, truly am blessed and feel wonderful to be able to be a part of this organization and contribute my skills to be able to continue its sustainability and impact that it can have in the world. So I'm super thrilled to be a part of this, to be able to meet all of you and to hear how these gatherings take place. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie. That was beautiful. I also want to mention that Sandy Higgins is with us, and she's a translator with Yoga Alliance, and she's part of our bilingual member support team. So Sandy, if you just will tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Yoga Alliance.
Sure. Thank you so much. And Maya, I just want to add that when I first got to Yoga Alliance, Jossie was my buddy, and you're the first person she said I needed to connect with. So
Oh,
it's so
thank
great
you.
to be here with you and Salim and Francisco. Thank you. I am a bilingual member support representative at Yoga Alliance, one of several on the team. I represent French speakers. So we work with I work with the Francophone members who need assistance with their membership in French. We also have Chinese, Japanese, and Spanish representatives, and they're going to be joining you all thanks to Maya in future meetings. So I'm really happy to be here today representing the bilingual member support team for French speakers. And Yoga Alliance is just really committed to growing our international community and serving it better by offering assistance and communication in the mother tongues of our members as best we can. So we're still growing, obviously, in that regard, but it is one of the intentions and the reasons that I'm here. It's an honor to be here as such. So I lived in France for several years, many years ago, and have continued to work in French all these years, though learning new vocabulary is always happening, especially when we're talking in yoga now and in other nuances, the interfaces of technology and so forth. So anyway, it's continuous learning and lots of gratitude. Thank you, Maya.
You're so welcome. Wonderful to hear you too. And at this time, it's my pleasure to welcome and turn the Sangha over to our co-host, Francisco Morales Bermudez, who is in Peru, and Salim Rollins, who is in Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya.
We never know where Francisco is.
It's true. Francisco was just in Portugal. So where are you, Francisco, as a matter of fact?
I'm in Miami at my cousin's. I think every Latino, almost every Latino has a cousin in Miami.
Absolutely.
So I'm in Miami at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
Did I see your hand go up,
It's not
Josie?
Josie's hand go up. There you go.
There you go.
Yes, I have a cousin in Miami.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah, just landed here from leading a yoga teacher training in Portugal, and it's beautiful to keep, really grateful to be here with all of you. I'm excited to hear the stories and the insight that Chara, Mar, and Acosia Red Elk have to share with us today. And it's really beautiful to be collaborating with Maya and the Yoga Alliance. So thank you, everyone. And that cat is, I don't know, I think that cat should lead the conversation.
Ruby cat.
Yeah.
So I think let's get into it. We're just to shed a little bit of light on what this is. As Maya said, it's an international gathering Sangha, and this is really Maya's brainchild that we've kind of helped bring to into action, into manifestation, we being me and Francisco from Synergy, and really conceived as a platform to to connect people internationally and also to give voice to voices that we sometimes don't hear in yoga communities. So that's really what it's about, and I think we'll jump right in. We want to hear from our amazing presenters today. So what I'll ask is if each of you can just give a 1 or 2 minute, no more than 2 minutes, we keep it tight, little background of who you are and the work that you do and where you come from. Where you come from and maybe where you're at. They might not be the same thing. Francisco.
Yeah, and just to add to what Salim just shared, if any of you wants to share a screen or share any pictures or images, like this is your time to share how you wish to. I spoke with Mad earlier and she's like, I'd like to share a couple of pictures. So we'll make you a co-host. That way, you can do that easy. So if you don't mind clicking that part, Salim, so we can.
Got you. Absolutely. So why don't we go, I'll just call out the presenters like clockwise. I'm gonna go. So we can start with Mariela. If you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are and what you do.
Y Mar, cualquier cosita, si deseas que traduzca, yo puedo traducir sin ningún problema. ¿Ok?
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I prefer speaking Spanish, because a little nervous, but it's with all my love. Every word I say in Spanish, okay?
Yeah,
Thank you. Bueno, mi trabajo actual es compartir filosofía del yoga
my current work is to share the philosophy of yoga
y meditación, movimiento a través de actualmente una plataforma online, ya que me acabo de mudar al Valle Sagrado.
and meditation and movement. Now that I've moved to the Sacred Valley of Peru, I share it online.
Sí, hacerlo a diario no solo me ayuda a mí, sino a las personas con quien comparto.
Doing it daily does not only like help me, but it also helps the people that in which I share it with.
Y bueno, brevemente les voy a contar acerca de mí y del yoga.
And briefly, I'm going to share about me and about yoga.
Sí, conocí el yoga hace 9 años
I got to know yoga about 9 years ago.
y luego hice 2 teacher training para mejorar mi práctica. Mi finalidad no era enseñar, sino conocer un poco más.
And I did 2 teacher trainings to improve my practice. And my purpose was not to teach, but to learn more.
Sí, y bueno, luego estudié en la Embajada de la India aquí en Perú y fue cuando descubrí que mi vocación era servir.
And I studied at the Embassy of India here in Peru. And that's when I learned that my compassion was to be of service. My passion
Sí.
was to be of service.
Ujú. Y empecé la aventura en el 2017 con unos amigos.
And I began the adventure in 2017 with some friends.
Nos dimos cuenta que el yoga no era muy cercano a cierto sector de la población.
And we noticed that yoga was not too close to certain sectors of the population.
Y bueno, hicimos una pequeña encuesta de por qué las personas de fuera de la ciudad no practicaban yoga.
So we began a small survey to see why people outside of the city were not practicing yoga.
Y bueno, yo también estaba empezando y decidimos hacer yoga gratis en los parques.
And I was also starting, so we started to just teach yoga for free in the parks.
Ujú. Y la encuesta arrojó que las personas pensaban que el yoga era para gente de dinero.
And the kind of the survey and the research that we did gave us the feedback that people thought that yoga was for people with money.
Así es, o que el yoga era una práctica muy aburrida, ¿no? Para las personas que tenían ansiedad, no conocían los beneficios.
Or yoga was especially like for kind of like a boring practice for people that had anxiety and they didn't know a lot of the benefits.
Entonces nos dimos cuenta que podíamos ayudar a muchas personas a conocer algo que les iba a hacer muy bien.
So we noticed that we could contribute something to people that could help them in their movement.
Entonces empezamos con clases en las noches y luego los domingos en el parque. Al inicio era gratis y luego era colaboración de cada persona que asistía a
So we started with classes in the evenings, and initially it was free, and then later on it was like a contribution for the people that assisted the lessons.
Es cuando empezó mi aventura, me di cuenta que mi propósito era servir y que no solo me ayudaba a mí esas clases en los parques, sino también a muchas personas que llegaban.
And that's when I realized my purpose was to serve, and these classes didn't only assist me, but they also were of service to the people that came and attended the lessons in the parks.
Y así es como me involucré más, fui voluntaria en festivales como Yogamar, por ejemplo.
I got deeper into this, and that's when I started to participate in the Yogamar Festival, which is a festival that I put together in the north of Peru, communicating the arts of yoga and making it accessible to a lot of people. Also communicating Ocean, conservation, preservation, and it's unique. And just a side note, this goes just a side note because Mar referenced it. In Peru, the ocean is a goddess, and she's called Mamacocha. Continúa, hermanita, dale.
Sí, y bueno, así es como empezó mi aventura con el yoga. Luego vino la pandemia, también busqué manera cómo ayudar. Y bueno, tuve el propósito también de motivar a las personas a que se muevan, a que suelten el miedo. Y así es como continué mi trabajo en el yoga, ¿no?
Yeah, perfecto. Ahí estamos bien, creo.
Sí.
And then it kept, her journey kept going, the pandemic took place, and then yoga was, for her, it became something to share to help people break free of fear during those times. Creo que ahí estamos bien, Mar. I think we're good there, and we can keep flowing to Salim, whoever's next on your screen on the clock. Clockwise. I know how wise the clock is nowadays, though, but clockwise.
Next on the Brady Bunch screen. So thank you, gracias, Mar. So Chara is next on my screen. Welcome, Chara. Joining us, by the way, it's 1:15, 1:25 in Australia. Thank you for staying up super late at night. We appreciate you.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me. I would like to start by acknowledging the Muka people. They're the traditional custodians of the land on which I currently sit, and by paying my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I am Chara Caruthers, and I'm a yoga teacher, a yoga therapist, and an Ayurvedic practitioner. And I am coming to you from Australia. I'm on an island, actually, about 40 minutes south of Brisbane, Australia, which is on the northeast coast of Australia. And I've been living here in Australia this time for about 10 years, the first time I arrived in Australia. I'm originally from California. I grew up in the United States. Yeah, so I don't have, my Australian accent isn't all that strong. I first moved here to Australia in the 90s after university. And then I left in about the mid 90s and did a little traveling around the world. So I've lived a number of places around the world. And so now I'm back here, and I've been here for about 10 years. And I teach yoga classes here, group classes. I also work with individual clients, both for yoga practice and also for Ayurveda. And I also teach Ayurveda to yoga teachers as a way of expanding their practice and expanding their offerings for their students. Yeah, I mean, I could talk more, or I can pass it over. I'm not sure how we want to do it.
Yeah, I think the brief bios are great initially.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Space for discussion. So I think that's great. We want to hear your opinions about things too. Thank you, Chara.
Yeah, sure. No worries.
Yeah, and welcome. Acosia Red Elk, Karibu, welcome.
Thank you, Katsiaya. Tatsmewi, good morning from the Umatilia tribe. My name is Acosia Red Elk. My Indian name is my given name, but it's pronounced Acosia. It means young swan rising, so they would only say that word when they seen a young swan taking its very first flight off the water. I'm here on the Umatilia Reservation in northeastern Oregon. We are in the homelands of the Salmon people, and I'm very honored to be here. Thank you. My work today is being a wellness advocate for Indigenous communities and beyond. I found yoga about 10 years ago, and I grew up with a spiritual mother and a background. So when I found the practice of yoga, and they talked about using the power of thought, and they talked about how it could cleanse our body and help us to heal at the cellular level in so many different ways, mentally, physically, and spiritually, I knew I had to get certified as soon as possible. So my work is very much centered around working with indigenous peoples to help them to heal from traumas through movement. Movement being the practice of yoga while we're orchestrating our body in certain ways. We are aligning it with the cosmos. We are using our mind and our spiritual backgrounds to heal ourselves through the practice of yoga. So mentally, physically, and spiritually, and movement being that with our breath, we move energy, and with our thoughts, we move old programming, and that we could heal in different ways, being movement spiritually and physically and mentally as well. A lot of indigenous people are experiencing a lot of trauma. Of course, we are healing. We're on the path to healing, but we've been struggling for a long time. And so I use yoga as a tool for healing. I use it in a way that we can sit in meditation and clear our timeline through the power of thought and prayer and breath. And I also use yoga, braiding it into our tribal dancing to create a well-rounded physical workout as well as mental and spiritual. We use our tribal dance combined with a yoga to bring wellness to our body, mind, body, spirit. Wellness is a byproduct of our daily life. So if we're not happy in our career, if we're not happy in our environment, if we're not happy in our body, then how can we help to heal anything else around us? And I think that with the practice of yoga, people who are teaching yoga, people who are attending yoga classes and using it as healing, all have the same mindset that we're on the path to becoming better from releasing a lot of the holdings that we've been holding on to. So I bring in 7th generation philosophy into all of my classes, whether I'm teaching a HIIT class or whether I'm teaching a very meditative yoga class. 7th generation philosophy comes from the Iroquois Nation, from the Eastern tribes over around the New York area. And 7th generation philosophy is utilized by every single indigenous person on earth. And that is that we realize that every single action, every reaction, everything that we do carries a ripple. And we are the ripple of the past, and our future generations will be, their experiences and realities will be a ripple of our choices today. So yoga is a very special tool to help us become better ancestors, to become a good ancestor, and to set our future generations up for success by healing our body and healing our relationships with one another.
Beautifully said.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
Absolutely. Great to have you all. So let's dive in, yes? So for the whole group, everyone here, if there's something that comes up as someone speaking, you can raise your hand or use the raise hand function, and we encourage people to interact with the presenters. So we're in a circle here, even though we're on Zoom, and that's what we want to cultivate. So I put this first.
You can also drop anything into the chat as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll put this first question out to the 3 presenters. And that's how yoga is uniquely expressed in your culture community. For some folks, you may kind of be the person really bringing the culture of yoga into your community. And I think we'd love to hear about what that experience is like, if it's not sort of pre-existing. And we can do it popcorn style. I don't know, Mariela, is it helpful to translate? Or are we clear on the question?
¿Entiendes la pregunta que está haciendo Salim ahí? Que, o sea, para algunos de nosotros, ¿está bien?
¿Cómo se expresa el yoga de manera única en mi país? ¿Esa fue la pregunta?
En tu comunidad y para algunos de nosotros, o sea, ustedes son los que más o menos están canalizando y trayendo la práctica a tu comunidad. Entonces, ¿cuál ha sido tu experiencia en esos momentos?
Bueno.
Solamente, esa es la pregunta, ¿no? Yeah, should we keep flowing then with Mark? Yes, dale, hermanita, dale.
Quiero compartir unas fotos, tal vez pueda compartir algo de eso.
Sí, dale. Ahí tienes, ya estás como huésped del evento, ahí Salim te ha puesto. Entonces,
bueno.
Aquí está, no sé si se puede ver.
Si quieres, anda la primera pregunta. Parece que, so Mark put together a presentation for you guys.
Puse algunas fotos para que puedan ver un poquito cómo disfrutamos del yoga en mi comunidad.
So I put together some pictures so you can see how we get fruit, disfrutar, how we get the fruit from the yoga practice in our community.
Sí, bueno, definitivamente el yoga en mi comunidad, por lo menos en Lima, está haciendo muchos cambios en las personas, sobre todo en el contexto en que vivimos
So at
actualmente.
least yoga in my community, at least in Lima, it's making a lot of changes in people, at least in the context in which we live. And by the way, Lima is a city of 10 million people.
Sí, en Perú la pandemia se vivió muy intenso, hubo orden de inamovilidad, nadie podía salir de sus casas.
In Peru, there was like an order that kept people from moving, so no one could leave their house.
Entonces eso trajo muchas secuelas y mentales a las personas. Y quisimos salir a las calles a poder practicar yoga al que quisiera hacerlo, ¿no? Perdón, no en las calles, desde mi casa lo hice. Y cuando se pudo, salimos a las calles.
So from my house, I was able to compart yoga, and then when it was permitted, we took it to the streets.
Sí, y bueno, la comunidad de yoga en Perú es importante, pero siento que todavía falta mucha compenetración entre los profesores y toda la comunidad.
So dices que la comunidad de yoga es importante, pero falta no te escuché
Claro,
bien.
falta comunicación, todavía no hay una unión muy fuerte entre profesores.
So there's the practice of yoga is really important, but there's not a strong union and communication with the yoga teachers, with everyone.
Uh-huh. Sin embargo, siento que sería muy poderoso si nos unimos y podemos difundir esta práctica para todas las personas que necesitan liberarse, no solo mentalmente, sino físicamente, porque la tasa de personas enfermas subió mucho, personas que necesitan tratamiento psicológico, con ansiedad, depresión.
So I'm going to work backwards from what she said. There's a lot of people going through psychological and physical, there's depression and ailments taking place. So, this kind of just incentivized and motivated us to teach more yoga, to bring it to more people.
Y bueno, acá hay muchos espacios en Perú donde se pueden hacer retiros, muchos espacios hermosos en la costa, en la sierra, en la selva. Creo que sería una experiencia única que se vive aquí en este país, si se hacen retiros.
Disculpa, hermanita, dime, o sea, porque se me hace difícil recordar todo lo que dices, entonces
Perdón.
No, está bien, tranqui. So, we have a lot of really beautiful places in Peru for retreats. We have the coast, the sierra, the mountains, and the selva. Just side note, Peru is a country with the largest variety of microclimates in the world.
Sí, y bueno, esa es la manera como siento que el yoga se expresa de manera única en mi país, ¿no? Los espacios, las personas que tenemos intención de cambiar la situación en el país.
So this is a way that I think Peru is that yoga is uniquely expressed in Peru, and also the fire motivation that we have to make positive change here, no? And on this side note, she obviously wrote like a really thorough presentation. Each has a lot of really beautiful information. Gracias por tu presentación, Mar. Vamos a regresar a ti después.
Sí.
Y por ahora seguimos fluyendo con otros que están presentando y cualquier cosita que deseas contribuir ahí, habla nomás, ¿ok? Um, yeah, yeah, I feel a lot of joy and just blessed to be able to collaborate with Maud, with this wonderful sister. The Yogamar Festival that we started, without her, it wouldn't have been the awesomeness and the movement that it became, you know. So estoy floreando de ti. Okay.
So I have a question for Acosia. Acosia. Yes. So have you done a comparison between the 7th generation philosophy and some of the yoga philosophy? How do you compare the two?
Yeah, they're very much similar, of course. And it's interesting because when I think of, well, between 5 and 10 years ago is when yoga really first started entering indigenous, like Native American and First Nations communities, First Nations being Canadian Indians. A lot of natives were very reluctant to try yoga because they actually thought that possibly it was appropriation, and that it wasn't their religion, so they shouldn't be practicing. But when you really look at the inside of each type, each people, each type of nation, between India and Native America, North America, South America, Canada, South America are all the same. We're indigenous people of this continent. And the philosophies are very, very much the same. A lot of the old traditions, traditional beliefs, and the ways of living, the ways of being, very much the same in that everything that we do it in a good way. We do it with a sustainable mindset. We do it by thinking about others and never only about ourselves. I do notice that a lot of the different teachings of the yogic philosophy are a lot more detailed, very much more detailed and organized. A lot of the native philosophies were never written, or it was all oral histories. So because of that, a lot of that has been lost, but also people are remembering. But yeah, it's very much similar. That's why I was so interested in learning about yoga and presenting it to my people, because I wouldn't come at them with something that I didn't trust. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And Chara, do you have any thoughts on this? I think, I imagine you're in an interesting, I don't quite know your background in Australia, but I think, I'm assuming, are you African American? Do you identify that way?
Yes.
Living in Australia, teaching yoga.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's interesting to me. Like, I mean, you don't need to stay on that, but that is an interesting, sort of cultural pollination. So what have some of your experiences been like?
Well, I mean, the yoga has a really long history here in Australia. And in fact, I took my very first yoga class ever in Australia in, I think it was around 1990 or so. Yoga has been around here in Australia for a really long time. And so we're seeing it as a mature practice. There are a number of different organizations here that help to support yoga teachers. Yoga is practiced in numerous and all different ways around the country, and it is seen as a really mature practice in that it's being used in a lot of different ways in a lot of different communities, and we're seeing everything you can imagine: yoga retreats, yoga therapy, all sorts of stuff across the country. My particular experience as a yoga teacher, especially living in a community that is relatively small. So I live outside of the major cities, and I have since I've been here in the last 10 years. So I've seen the way that yoga shows up in smaller communities. most of the people who live in Australia live on the coasts. So the center of Australia is what we call the red center. And it's a very inhospitable place to be. And so lots of people are sort of gathered around the coasts, and the very center of Australia isn't all that populated. And so what you'll see around the coast, and what my experience has been as a yoga teacher and a yoga student, is that people like to take advantage of the natural settings. So there's a lot of practice, there's a lot of yoga that's actually practiced outdoors. In smaller communities, what you'll often see is people practicing or teaching yoga from their homes. And in fact, I did that when I first came here about 10 years ago. Was I taught, small yoga classes out of my home, out of my garage. And yoga really is a practice here that is used to bring people together. And so what you'll see in small communities, and now I'm living in another small community. I've just moved from where I was living previously onto this island, as I mentioned. It's a practice that's used to really engender and create community. And so for me, building a community of students, it was really about sharing my particular yoga, which, as I mentioned, as an Ayurvedic practitioner, is very much infused with Ayurveda. And so, yeah, as an African American, it's a very interesting experience to be here in Australia. Even though Australia is in some ways like the United States in that it's a melting pot of cultures. What you see outside of the major cities, tends to be fewer sort of Black and brown people. And so for me, having the opportunity to be a teacher and to create a community around me has very much been has been an opportunity to educate people about, what different people are like, different cultures are like, and how yoga is an expression of that, of where we come from, of who we are, of what we care about. And so it's also been, especially in these small communities where I've lived and worked, it's been an opportunity to expand people's horizons about the different kinds of people that exist, around the world, because not a lot of people in these smaller communities have a lot of experience with people, even just from other countries. And so I think I've felt quite privileged to be able to do that. And I have certainly felt from my students in my community that there's a recognition and an appreciation for that. And so I've had wonderful experiences here, teaching in workshops, teaching in even big festivals as well here, and often being the only brown person or the only Black person there, but also feeling very much like I'm establishing, a voice, I'm representing, which is an important thing to do here.
Relate to that experience. Interestingly, even though I live in Africa, I live in Kenya, and I am African American, I identify that way. I have a similar experience of educating people around, what an African American person might be like, because there's a lot of misconceptions, even within the family I married into. Thank you. So you talked about community building, and that's where we want to go, actually, in the conversation. So maybe Mariela or Acosia, like, what is your experience like in your community? We saw a bit from your presentation, Mariela. Maybe you can expand, or Acosia, building community. What does that look like? What are the challenges? What are the nuances of that?
Can I just say one thing?
Please.
I want to let everyone know that they can be a part of the conversation. So now that, everyone's introduced themselves, if you have a question, please join in.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and also I'd like to just think that point that Acosia made a couple of times, just with Native communities, sometimes we live in like a separatist culture that kind of, we make these lines and you belong to this line, you need a passport to get into this line, like nationalism. And I really appreciate what you referenced earlier regarding Native communities, how there's, just seeing the similarities from the Americas, at least, just as someone who's traveled from the Andes and the community of the Incas and I've sat with many circles. You know, it's just seeing the oneness in it. So thank you for saying that, and thank you, Maya, for inviting everyone to join. This is popcorn style, like my popcorn loving brother loves to say. So
That's me.
yeah. Linda
You're
Key
welcome.
mentioned, Linda Key está ahí, ella desea tu presentación, Mariela, que se la compartas más tarde, dice.
Thank you. Yeah, so for me, as an Indigenous yoga teacher here, our communities are very spread out. So I'm traveling from community to community, whether it is traveling physically or now because we have this online presence, we can use Zoom, we can gather virtually. So the work that I'm doing is not necessarily just in one place. It's all over, and there's Native communities all over the United States and Canada and down into South America. Every single one of these communities is experiencing their own different types of traumas, because every single tribe had different traumas. Some tribes didn't have as much war as others. Some tribes didn't experience as much, let's just say, extreme trauma, colonization, death, rape, the different things that happened in the past. These things are still in our bodies and minds, affecting us very much. When you don't feel good about yourself, that's where dysfunction and abuse and addiction stems from. We all know this. So when you're going into these Indigenous communities, there's a lot of struggle happening physically, mentally, and spiritually. You can see it when you drive into the communities, the way that they care for their homes. Of course, Natives are always talking about protecting the land, but you've got to understand that we are in extreme amount of trauma and haven't come out of that yet. So that could look like not taking good care of your things. So you might go onto a reservation and see that there's some areas of that community that might be really, really dirty. They don't clean up after themselves. That's only going to be a majority of those places. But because of that, people grow up not feeling good about themselves, having a lot of clutter in their brains. Can you imagine children going to school? When I grew up, I'm from a reservation that we're actually a nice looking reservation, as opposed to some others. And so what that does to your mind is it makes you not feel good about yourself. It makes you feel really worried because you know there's a lot of trauma going on. I always knew that there was trauma going on in my friends' homes. And at school, I would worry about that. So I had so much worry. I felt embarrassed to be Native American. I was ashamed of who I was. I'm also a half-breed. My mom's white. So I also was always fighting to fit into both communities, seeing all of the dysfunction happening from a personal standpoint, and going out into communities and doing the work. I know what is happening there. And a lot of that is still going on because of the traumas in our minds. And yoga helps us to start healing. Obviously, we all know that, but it gets deep, deep, deep down in there. And that's the stuff that I teach. When I got certified, they would ask us what we envisioned about being a yoga teacher. And a lot of people envisioned having these classes that had all these people in perfect postures lined up perfectly on their mats with these, all white clothing, or just these perfect settings. And I was like, gosh, when I think about teaching a yoga class, I want people walking in off the streets in their jeans, and people who have been abused and people who were the abusers. That's who I want in my class, because I want to really get down into there and let them know what I felt when I went into my yoga classes, and that those tears that came up of knowing that I was working through something, that I was letting something go, things that are attached to our body and attached into our DNA. And because of all of that historical and intergenerational trauma, we're just piling up new trauma because our lives are so freaking intense on the reservation, and it's like people are living in extreme trauma. And what yoga does, bringing yoga into these communities, yoga is growing in popularity around tribal communities. people are starting to get certified. People are starting to realize that they have work to do. People are starting to realize that this work is on a deeper level. We're starting to remember, and we're starting to shed all these layers of, and yoga helps us to do this when we're in our practice, and maybe it's a physical practice and we're struggling through holding a pose, and we find all that resistance and we feel like falling, we're holding on strong, we start crying. Gosh, all this stuff is unpacking, right? And so we're shedding all these layers of programming and limiting beliefs, old thought forms that are not positive, aren't helpful for us anymore. We've been living in survival mode. I mean, all of us, all across the world. And every single one of us is in a state of healing. It's like one of the most popular things right now is healing. So as yoga teachers, we have this special opportunity to help people to see the healer within themselves, because growing up with a spiritual healer mother and then coming to a yoga class, I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that yoga could help us to heal. I grew up thinking yoga was, doing postures and holding these insane, amazing postures to be able to manipulate your body and hold your body in certain ways, which is also true. And that can also be very healing. But realizing that yoga was more of a spiritual thing, it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe I didn't know that. All the way up into my 30s, I didn't know that. So going into communities, it's like we want to look good first to make us feel good. That's micro level stuff. Everybody comes in the Westerns here in America, everyone goes to yoga, most people, because they want to look good and feel good. They want to have balance. They want to have strength, inner strength, and they want to be flexible. It's all about safety too. But then you realize, and we all know this, that this bigger thing happens and it moves from micro to macro, and you realize that everything that you do is going to ripple into the future. It's going to ripple into your families. We're building a solid foundation. And so that's what I'm teaching in my classes, is that in order to be a good ancestor, in order to be able to live your life with the 7-generation philosophy, meaning that everything we do carries a ripple, and how are we going to help to save our resources and protect our resources, our earth resources? How can we do that if our inner resources are dying, if our inner resources, the blood in our body, our rivers, our streams are drying up? They're not, we carry our ancestors in our blood. And if we are not utilizing that, if we are not connected to that, if we're not doing our work, then it's not as powerful. It doesn't, you know what I mean? And so just teaching people that in order to, because natives are always like, we need to save the water, we need to protect the resources, protect the land, the world. And in order to do that, we've got to protect these resources. We've got to have a strong body. That means also exercising. That means exercising your mind. That means clearing your passageways. That means clearing your mind, because how can we save this if we can't save this? So the idea from my line of work is that movement is medicine, and that we have work to do, and that in order to make it to eldership, which is the goal in my communities, you want to make it to eldership so that you can share all of the things you've been gathering, all of the old traditional knowledge and all of the new information. But how can we do that if we're not healthy all the way around? And so that's what I bring into yoga communities, and Native people all over are doing the same thing. And the reason behind their yoga practice is that they need to help heal the world around them. So they've got to get healthy. They've got to unpack all of the shit that happened, in order to be able to, energy won't move forward if it doesn't feel safe. So,
and I think it's all so powerful. And I just want to put out to everyone, what about the breath? Many times when we speak about yoga, we're not talking about that subtle thing that everybody can tuck in their pocket and carry with them everywhere to help them with healing. So I'd love for us to move. And Chara, maybe you could start talking about how you use the breath in your classes in Australia. And I want to tell you, Acosia, thank you so much for sharing. It was just so moving. And trauma, to me, yoga is the key to releasing trauma, to healing, to growing, to becoming. And what we're becoming is self. You know, and like you said, Acosia, that's what we need if we're going to save all of the elements around us and impact the earth and the environment. So back to breath. Let's talk about breath. Chara.
Thank you. Thank you, Acosia, for that too. Wonderful to hear the breath. Well, for me, you know, just from the traditions that I come from and from in terms of yoga, and from my own personal beliefs about yoga as a practice, the breath is really the center of the practice. There's been a little bit of talk here about the last couple of years and, you know, the pandemic and the impacts that that has actually had on countries, on individuals. And for me, you know, over the last couple of years, Australia has been a really interesting place for the pandemic in the way that it sort of unfolded here. And some would say that the impacts here haven't been, at least in terms of lives lost, certainly hasn't been as devastating as the US. However, what we have had here is Melbourne, Australia, is a city here, one of the major cities here in Australia, had the most days of lockdown. So by lockdown, and by most days, I mean Melbourne, Australia had over 200 days of lockdown. And what that meant was that the residents of Melbourne, Australia were unable to go further than about 5 kilometers from their homes. And they weren't unable to have visitors to their homes. And so there were many, many people who were in isolation there, and the impacts of that have been quite devastating for the city, and they've rippled out throughout the country. And so in terms of practice for me, and I've taught classes online during the pandemic and beyond, the breath has been a really important aspect of that, because of just what it gives us access to in terms of being able to still the body, and also in terms of being able to still and open the mind. And so I've always taught for folks, especially because the breath is something that we can always feel to some degree in control of. I think it's an incredibly powerful tool for supporting the mind and body, for helping to direct, you know, from an Ayurvedic standpoint, helping to direct and calm the energies that kind of run our show from moment to moment. And so in my practice, I use the breath a lot in terms of pranayama, but I'm always directing people back to the breath, because I teach that the breath mirrors the mind and the body. And so if we can take control or connect with the breath, that means that we can have a deeper connection to our present moment experience, which, you know, in these challenging times has been a particularly useful sentiment and tool.
Ashe. Ashe. You know, I want to encourage everyone to speak up if you'd like to. And I want to talk a little about movement, because Acosia talked about using the indigenous movement with the yoga. And I think someone else shared about that, but that fascinates me, because when I came back when I studied in India, I learned the most important thing I could teach to people who were fearful of yoga was the breath, that I should begin with the breath. And the other thing was movement, you know, not yoga postures, but movement. So I'm just curious. Mariela, what do you think about movement with your community?
¿Qué pienso acerca del movimiento en mi comunidad? Eso me preguntó Francisco. Perdón, estaba distraída viendo compartiendo mi presentación. ¿Cuál fue la pregunta?
Esto es lo que preguntó. Ella más o menos quiere saber el movimiento, o sea, cómo es que afecta, que te afecta a ti y la comunidad, porque el movimiento está conectado mucho con las emociones y a dónde es que estamos, ¿no? Físicamente.
Perfecto, gracias, Francisco.
Nada.
Bueno, el movimiento primero empieza por mí. Voy a ahora hacerlo más despacio para que puedas ayudarme, Francisco.
Tranqui, dale.
Siento que el movimiento empieza por mí, la energía sale desde mí.
Movement starts with me. The energy comes from me.
Y ese movimiento que empieza, mejor dicho, la energía que sale de mí puede inspirar a otras personas.
The energy that comes from me can inspire other people.
Y es la experiencia que tuve cuando empecé con, a compartir yoga.
And this is the experience I had when I started to share.
Las personas se acercaban a mí y me decían que sentían algo muy hermoso y no sabían qué era.
People would come to me, I feel something really beautiful. I don't know what it is.
Y yo sentía y les decía que eran ellos mismos, que estaban despertando su energía.
It is you. I would tell them it's you awakening your energy.
Y ese fue el gancho para poder crear una comunidad en mi caso.
And that in a way was a hook that to cultivate community in my home.
Cómo te mueves es como tu energía se mueve. Cómo
How you
puedes
move.
inspirar a los demás.
How you move is how your energy moves. Is how you can inspire other people.
Y ellos les da curiosidad qué es lo que yo hago para tener esa energía.
And they become curious, what is that I do to have that energy?
Y les digo, es yoga.
And I tell them it's yoga.
Eres tú, tu mente, tu cuerpo y tu espíritu juntos trabajando.
You, your mind, your body, and your spirit together working.
Eso es.
That's it.
Ashe.
Gracias.
Bello. Gracias, hermano.
Gracias. Gracias a ti por
Ashe.
traducir. Gracias.
Yeah,
Gracias.
So I just wanted to add to that really quick. The breath is so important. Even just as little kids, our parents would teach us that was our main and most powerful energy source. And my mom would teach us how to breathe with plants and breathe with the trees and breathe with the soil, and how when we breathed, our energy rippled outward from our body and emitted into all of those things and helped them. And that our energy also ripples so far outside of our body that obviously everything gets affected by our energy, our actions, our reactions. In my classes, when I talk about the breath, I like to encourage people to think about that fact, about how they're breathing into the air around them, not just their bodies, and that they're breathing into the ground beneath them, and that their breath is causing also this energy ripple outward. It's a lot like our dances, because our dances have, all of our dances have noisemakers, so different kinds of things that make noise. And a lot of these noises have significance, just like the ohms and the different the sounds and the different, the Sanskrit words have vibrational energies attached to them, why they're so significant to using those words with the poses. But thinking about what your breath just emitting outward and then back in, and teaching people to understand that their breath is helping them connect to every living being, and that we're sharing that air with all those living beings, and that we can breathe into the land around us and heal it, healing our environment with our breath. So I just wanted to share that, because that's something my mom taught us as kids. It also came through in yoga practice, and I like to share that when I'm speaking, because it helps people realize their practice is so much more than just within. it's also outside of their body as well, and realizing that you can affect everything else around you.
Beautiful. Just beautiful.
Yeah. Silence is golden. It's so good. So,
Can we
shall we
call
close
on
with
Guy?
prayer?
Can we call on
Yeah.
Gaia?
You just did.
Hi. I so wanted
Welcome
to say
back, Aya.
something about the breath. Oh my God, I was just, I literally feel very soft in my eyes. That just brought up so much for me over, I mean, the ultimate thing for me in the yoga practice is the breath. I mean, that's it. I feel all the practices, every single thing that we do, every practice, whether it's movement, yoga, martial arts, everything uses an element of the breath. That, like Acosia was saying, the nature, the earth, everything is breathing. Everything is doing this incredible movement of contraction and expansion, contraction and expansion. And that's happening inside of me. And I feel that the ultimate goal of all the yoga masters, that's what they ended up at the very last moment, is the ability to stay with their breath, to reach samadhi. And in fact, I know in yoga, pranayama was considered a very advanced yoga. It's everything else comes before they even get you starting to do pranayama. So that's just, to show you how important that is. But the thing that I was just feeling, my God, yes, the breath is so available. It's so available. It is free. It's the first thing we took when we came in. It's the last thing we're going to do when we leave. And there's this incredible vinyasa practice in between, breath and movement. You were asking about movement, Maya. So there is this wonderful life, this vinyasa of movement that makes me weep sometimes when I think of how we're being moved. And the ultimate practice is to consciously join with your breath, consciously, not just knowing that I'm alive because I have breath. In Jamaica, a lot of people say, I love this about Jamaicans. Everywhere, everybody says, yeah, man, me all right, man, me a breathe. Me good, man, me have breath. It's a beautiful thing what they're saying. But if you take it one step further, it's not enough to know that you're alive because you have breath. It's good, but in the end, I don't want to say it means nothing. What's really, really good and why we're here is I'm alive, we're alive, and I now have the ability and the power to consciously connect with my breath. So it's more than I'm alive because I have breath. I'm truly alive because I now have connected with the powerful source of what's keeping me alive, my breath. When that goes, in that moment, I'm supposing, and I know from what I've heard, when that moment comes, we can ride. Talk about surfing, man. Oh my God. We can ride on that breath out. And when you know how to consciously connect, you can surf through this life. You just connect from one moment, one trauma into the next, what's going to happen. And you use the breath to go through that trauma. Breath is, all these years of practice and teaching. And I mean, it has brought me now, the ultimate practice, it feels like to me, is the breath. And I'll leave you with one quick story. It's so powerful and so ingrained in me now that I'll just tell you real quick. If you saw the movie Fahrenheit 9/11. If any of you saw that movie with Michael Moore, it's a documentary. It's a good movie, very good. It's about the Trade Center and everything that led up to it, and you know, all of that. Anyway, in the movie, it's a documentary. President Bush was in a school teaching. He was in a school somewhere in America. The president was there, and he was connecting in a classroom with the school children, and you have the CIA or the people standing around. Then when the plane hit the first building, they came in to tell him, and this, I'm in a movie theater in Miami Beach where I lived. So they came in and they told him, and literally, which I love Michael Moore's films, you know, he keeps the camera on those pivotal moments, and the camera stays on Bush, and he literally stopped breathing completely. He was like, and I'm watching him, no breath. And I'm like, breathe, bro. I go like, come on, President Bush, breathe. And I'm in the movie theater. I'm like, God, if I could get him to breathe. And what happened for me, which I wasn't taught, I started breathing for him. I was like, you can do it, breathe. And for a moment, it seemed like he breathed. So now I feel like we can even breathe for our ancestors. We can breathe for this earth, because as you said, it's in our blood. Everything from the beginning of time is in our blood, and we can clean that blood. As you know, we can purify that blood with our breath. We can connect with everything through our breath. So when you brought up when you said, what about the breath, Maya? I was trembling, and I thought, oh, I just want to listen, you know. But yeah, the breath is everything. And to me, that is the ultimate yoga practice. The ultimate, that is where we go back to. Everything comes back to the breath. Thank you for asking me.
Oh.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I could feel your spirit, my sister. Ashe.
Also, just to some, thank you, Gaia, and yeah, I love hearing you talk. I love everything you have to share. So thank you for. By the way, Gaia presented on our last Sangha last month, and all of you here today are always welcome to keep it flowing. You know, to rejoin and keep the conversation, keep pushing. You know, we need you to really keep sharing and keep educating ourselves, making ourselves stronger and polishing one another. In the Yoga Sutras, the Yoga Asana is referenced once. And I think that's pretty important, pretty valuable and it speaks to some of what you have referenced. I think the asana and the physical body and kind of maintaining health is a conduit to so many other aspects of yoga and insights. And I think that's in a very in a culture that's very kind of visually oriented, the pictures of asanas and everything. You know, it's wonderful, but it's using it for not getting stuck there, but using it as a way to keep the conversation going into breath, into ancestor, into earth, into, you know, the philosophy of yoga. So thank you for all of you for echoing that.
You know, I wanted to ask Chara, did you have something to share about movement and breath?
I mean, yes, that was just so beautiful. I'm still really sitting with that, you know? Yeah, I mean, I feel as though our bodies are our vehicle for expression in the world. And so movement is it's a really powerful and an important thing here in the world. And as you know, as a yoga teacher and yoga therapist over the years, I've certainly begun to connect with the language of the body and the power of the body for shifting the way that we are in our in our communities, in our individual expressions. I often say that, you know, move a muscle, change a feeling. That's like one of my favorite sayings. And I think that movement has the power to shift the way that we think and the way that we are and the way that we relate to ourselves and to the world around us. And so I do try to bring that sentiment and to engage in that as an inquiry when I teach here. I think, you know, Australia, I hadn't mentioned it so much, but Australia has a history, a long history of, you know, colonization, of oppression of our indigenous peoples here. And so yoga, some of these, you know, the things that we've been talking about, the breath and movement and some of the principles of yoga, you know, around compassion and interconnectedness. These are some of the foundations for why yoga here in Australia is being used as a way of bringing people together, and you know, and beginning to you know, create a bridge. Because one thing that's certainly happening here in Australia around our indigenous people is that there's a lot more awareness is growing. And there's also, what I'm seeing is there's efforts from the governments and the white populations to better understand what's happening in our indigenous communities. And so there's still a long, long way to go, I have to say. But one thing I'm happy about and impressed with is that yoga and, you know, movement, we have this common language of our bodies. And so these are the things that are, you know, are being put forward as a way of helping to build the bridge. Yeah.
I like how you said move a muscle, change a feeling, because I took a training with Nikki Myers with yoga and the 12 steps. And she was like, issues live in our tissues. And it was like at that conference, or actually she said that at a conference, and I was like, I have to get certified. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is everything that my mom taught me when I was a kid that I wasn't interested in hearing, you know. And when you talk about movement, my class powwow yoga is something I created for Native people that want to start powwow dancing, learning about their dances. And also for some people that aren't ready to try yoga yet, but they like dancing. And it's kind of the secret way to get people out of their comfort zone to try something new. And then in some cases, we have some Native people who want to start dancing now. They've never been a tribal dancer their whole life, but they always wanted to. They just didn't know how. So anyways, movement in my class is about, you know, we're doing the tribal dance. We're connecting to the ground with our feet. We are shaking the body. So we're releasing, you know, the issues that are in our tissues. We're loosening up the fascia. We are loosening up the tension that all of our emotional experiences are, you know, when they get stuck in time and place in our body, and they can manifest into tension and pain and disease. We're loosening all that up. So that movement is helping to move matter, move water, move thought. And when we stop moving a lot, we start coming inward. And movement helps us to expand that and open and reach outside of our universe and our consciousness and be brave and open, because when we don't feel good about ourselves, when we have a lot of shame and stuff in our body, in our mind, we are here. I see people that cover their whole faces with their hair and stuff, you know. So movement helps us to be expressive and to be like, here I am, and this is me, and to be brave with it, you know. But also just like, you know, our movement, and in yoga especially, we're compacting the body, we're twisting, we're extending. So we are compacting matter, we're spreading it out, we are releasing it. And that's just one of the coolest things to me, is looking at that part of our movement and what's really going on in there, you know. And our movement helps us to clear through blockages too, because sometimes when you're dancing or you're running or you're doing a really fast-paced yoga practice and you get really tired and you're like ready to stop, you experience that resistance and you meet it where it's at, and you either work through it or you humble yourself and stop and find stillness, you know? So there's so many things that are happening in it, and movement is my favorite part of that. And like she was talking about our breath, we're still moving significant amount of energy, and our body's moving too, but within stillness, because there's all this stuff happening inside, you know? So yeah, I love that part, and which is why I like to do the fiery practices. But thank you for letting me share on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lovely.
Yeah, something, I mean, what you were talking about, Acosia, in terms of like movement and sort of the contraction and the somatic release and opening that happens through movement. And also what it kind of brought me back to is seeing how culture is evolving and adapting. My quick example that I have here in Kenya is I married years ago into a Somali Kenyan family. And a lot of the women in the Somali community would after 30 years old, would typically get overweight. They weren't moving a lot. And even now, if you go into hospitals in Nairobi, you'll see like Somali is a small percentage here in Nairobi of the tribes, of the 42 tribes here. But in the hospitals, you'll see a lot of Somalis and Somali women. But in the last 10 years, I'd say, and maybe Francisco, you saw this a bit when you were in Nairobi, in the yoga studio, a lot of Somali women have started coming to yoga class, actually, which is pretty amazing because it's actually a very big cultural leap in terms of how Islam is practiced in that community. It can be a very kind of more conservative Islam in contemporary Somali culture, not historically. And so seeing that, even with like my mother-in-law, like seeing her get into juicing, movement, you know, just different wellness practices, to me has been reflective of consciousness sort of expanding in a certain way right now. And I think that's really interesting.
It's a movement.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's happening on Indian countries. There's a movement of people wanting to get healthy, and they thought that it was just ego. It kind of starts as ego, and then you realize it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
And it's a movement here as well.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that.
I feel it's very powerful because it goes beyond words. And sometimes we get stuck on words and politicking and politricking. You know, I feel, you know, dance, a lot of the cultures bringing dance have been doing dance forever, you know, and very powerful. Like the time of dancing is sacred.
Yeah, like that was our yoga.
Exactly.
Our ceremony. Yeah.
Exactly. And, you know, I feel that, you know, that's kind of, you know, yoga is getting a lot more people throughout the world to move, to dance, a very slow dance sometimes, but dance nonetheless.
And to just come to their centers, to get in touch with themselves, right? Like, because it's like a movement meditation.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I think, you know, this idea as well of making yoga accessible, not accessible, but sort of finding the overlap within cultures, you know, finding the connections, the threads within cultures is really important, you know, that we're not, you know, because yoga, I mean, if anything, it has to be supple, there has to be fluidity, it has to be adaptable as well, right? So it's sometimes we've had this conversation recently in different circles of that balance between kind of the tradition and history and honoring and acknowledging the lineage that we've received from, and also being able to kind of adapt to what the need is right now, because we are carrying the traditions forward and also creating or co-creating or recreating traditions as well. And to me, I always find this very interesting, this sort of being in the middle of holding tradition and also innovating at the same time, right?
Right. And you know, that process is movement. From one to the other, that's movement. I want to take us home with a meditation. So I'm going to ask everyone, because we're coming toward our close, and I'd like to just ask Francisco, did you have something you want to share before we move into meditation?
Yeah, like to echo what my brother Salim just communicated, because I think it's extremely powerful. If you look at the continent of India and the way that yoga was preserved and maintained and expressed throughout India, it was, you know, pretty different. The British colonization, the influence that the British colonization had on yoga, and some of yoga roots of asana was based on wrestling. What? You know, so how, you know, when during colonization taking place, you know, what happened is the culture of India wanted to embrace something that was theirs, you know, and how that was expressed. So I really, you know, just what Salim just communicated regarding movement and how do we, you know, kind of channel that is extremely valuable. So I just want to echo that, my brother. Thank you.
Yes, thank you,
Can I,
Francis.
I
Yes.
brought something to share to close us out. So would you like me to do that right now or before after?
Who's speaking?
Acosia.
Oh, I didn't see you. We'll let you end with that. I'm going to lead a meditation and you can close us out. Oh, there you are. Okay, so we're going to do what is called, you know, there are eight limbs in yoga, and one is meditation. We're going to do Shamatha Vipassana meditation. Take your palms and bring them down on your lap. Make sure that you're comfortable, and let's just lift the chest up forward and then relax it back. Lift the chest and exhale back. And could you tell that to Mariela so she knows too, Francisco?
Yeah, Mariela, vamos a cerrar aquí. Maya va a hacer una respiración y después Acosia va a compartir algo para cerrar el círculo de hoy. Es una inhalación, el pecho se levanta para adelante y después se relaja para atrás.
Thank you. And in this practice, the eyes are lowered, they're not closed. And just look wherever your eyes land. Keep your eyes open. They can be heavy-lidded, but not closed.
Y los ojos hacia abajo un poquito, quizás algo pesados, pero no cerrados.
And allow the breath to begin to move your belly, your rib cage, and your chest.
Y deja
Focus.
que tu respiración mueva tu estómago, tus costillas, tu pecho.
Focus on the breath.
Observa tu respiración.
Allow your eyes to open. And we invite Acosia to share.
So I'm going to be sharing with you a timeline clearing created by my mother and I. So just, you can either close your eyes or keep them open, keeping that breath. And then in your mind, repeat after me. I ask my conscious, subconscious, higher conscious. I ask my spirit and soul, my guides and guardian angels. I ask my teachers and master helpers through divine guidance to follow any emotional traumas, belief systems, programs, contracts, karma from past life, parallel life, this lifetime, and ancestral, to see the divine purpose within every experience, understanding who, what, when, where, and why. Recognizing that every experience is and was an opportunity for change and growth. Everything has a purpose. Following every emotion, every trauma, and every experience back in time and space. Removing contracts, deleting karma, following it back to now time, making sure to release any distorted or obsolete beliefs or programs and integrate those changes now in my RNA, my DNA, molecular structure, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Initiating these changes now. Just continuing to breathe, absorb, digest all the information from this and from our conversation. Slowly opening your eyes or coming back into this time and place. And we're going to begin those changes, retrograding them back to the last full moon. So everything that we just stated here, our subconscious will be going in to do the work. And that was just a very, very short part of a meditation that my mother does called a timeline clearing. Thank you.
Ashe. Ashe.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So much gratitude and a lot of courage, coraje, corazón, from everything, you know, that you guys have shared and fed with us today, and the things that we have put forward with this closing meditation, with the inspiration of Acosia and her mom. And thank you to your mother, and thank you to all your mothers. Yes. So the next Sangha will be May 18th. You're all always welcome to join and contribute to the conversation, like Maya stated.